Welcome to the Dad Report, a podcast for dads, by dads, about dad stuff.
Join us as we sit down and have meaningful conversations with friends, family, and coworkers.
We will talk about life, family, and so much more while working towards a goal of creating a healthy idea of what it means to be a dad. Sir Chadwick.
Justin, I was trying to think of something super fancy.
There's not
to say,
much. It ends up being Justina, and then I'm embarrassed, and you're embarrassed, and we're all embarrassed, and it gets real awkward real fast. So, but my man, the Dad Report, we're recording season 3 as we speak. Let's go. Little minor celebration.
Here we are.
Take that, Kevin Giannotti. We still in this thing. Mostly.
He catching up, but
he is catching. I know. I saw him announce season 2 the other day, and I was like, "Crap, we gotta get going." So,
for those of you who do not know who that is the Mr. Kicks and Minivans.
That's right. That's right.
See both the episode where he was on our podcast, and probably even better when we were on his podcast.
It was pretty fun when we were on his podcast. Yeah.
It was good.
It was good.
That was a long one.
Yeah, it was.
He likes to
go long. He kept it. He didn't cut it. I thought he was going to cut that down because I said some things. So,
yeah.
But no, that was good. Yeah,
do.
Kevin's becoming a fan of a friend of the show, and like he and I have had some offline correspondence about things non-podcast related, which has been really cool. So, Kevin, if you're listening, bud, I know you are probably shooting hoops at 5 a.m. or whatever it is you do, you crazy dad.
Doing 1,000 push-ups every day.
No kidding. His gym workouts are insane. Anyway, Kevin, we love you, bud. We're glad you're a friend of the Dad Report here. So, Chad, what do you have for us today? What is the topic of the parenting world, or that dads want to talk about that they don't want to talk about with their wives? And no, this is not the sex episode. You can go back to season 2 to listen to that one. But what you got for us?
Yeah, so I don't know necessarily that this is something that, a man's not going to talk to his wife about. I can see with a lot of couples that, the husband and wife may disagree on this topic, but
fair.
It's really around, adding some slack to that leash on our children. And so what I mean by that is really, and we've talked about this a little bit before, but I think I have a little bit of a different perspective now of just, allowing your kids to have freedom and, like a successively more, right, as time goes on. And we've talked about this kind of from the standpoint of, allowing your kids to have the opportunity to kind of fail while they're at home, right? To make mistakes while they're there. So when they're not, they will be able to learn from some of these things, right?
Yeah.
And, it'd be very easy for me to start by pointing the finger, which I probably will point the finger at some point. But I've noticed with mine, there's a couple of things that's difficult. And this is mostly with Pierce, right? Because he is in college now. And I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine recently, just kind of about in the realm of like spiritual things and our kids, kind of stepping in and taking ownership of their own discipleship to Jesus, right? And things of that nature. And he was explaining to me about how he has seen that as he steps back, he sees, it's not perfect, right? But he sees his kids kind of step into it.
Yeah.
And take some ownership. And to the type A perfectionist parent out there, no, it's probably not going to be as good as what you would do, what you would say, because, I got some of that, in the back of my mind, kind of churning as well. But I think when your child can do something, they are initiating themselves, right? That they are listening to the Holy Spirit within them, or even just, even something that's not necessarily
wasn't that
relationship with God, right?
Like a Joby talks about, or a J.D. Greer. I know he said this at Saturated, but that like the letting go of the coattails of your parents' faith, and you're putting it on for yourself. So
For sure. And so we have been, and Shauna and I will give each other pep talks like, hey, this needs to be the last time that you do that for him.
Mm,
Um, example, a couple weeks back, Shauna and I are on a walk, and we live right down the street from 1122, right? So we've got, we'll run into people. So we walked, I don't know, 3 miles ish. And so we were
woo,
in one of the adjoining neighborhoods, right? Just kind of walking around, and I totally forgot, but um there's a family in there. Um, I know his son. He's one of our students,
okay.
and so we got to talking, and turns out he leads a great disciple group with the 1825 ministry, right?
Okay.
So Shauna got home. She's like, you know what? I'm sick and tired. He's he's joining this group, so she signed him up. And I was like,
You've been
look,
voluntold.
am I glad that you did that? And he has agreed to now go to the first meeting.
Okay.
Yes. But I really think like maybe we need to not do that anymore. And she's like, no, totally. I get it. She's like, but I was just kind of, I
Or
was
at
kind of
least a
over it.
conversation with peers where like, hey, we ran into so and so. Turns out he leads this. I think it'd be a great benefit to you. Would you consider, right, that more invitational
And we
versus
did that after the fact, of course.
sure, sure. To then
Right.
let him know that he was gonna get an email the next morning about his registration.
Yes. Yes. So there's that, right? And so
Okay.
I wanted to start out with that illustration because that shows that I don't have this figured out, that I have room to grow, but I have seen some things, right? And so as we talked about before, I volunteer in the middle school student ministry
Mm-hmm.
at our church. So I see I see a lot of middle schoolers, right? I even see some high schoolers there. So I see a lot of these kids. And some of them are people that, whose families we're friends with, and some are not. And it's very interesting. We went to camp this summer, and I feel like I could tell stories from camp for many podcast episodes. But
And you might.
and I might. Um, but it's funny in watching parents drop their kids off. Some were like, "Hey, here's your duffel bag.
Yep.
Here's your pillow. Uh, you need
Please
some
bring
money
it
for
back.
lunch. See you when you get back." Right.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's some who are like, "Now, little Johnny, make sure you have,
Gosh.
all these little things, and call me when you get
Yes.
there, and call me when you leave,
Yes.
and make sure if you stop, you get something that has greens in it, and whatever, right? The whole thing. Um, and um, do I say this? I do. Uh, there's even a family um that I had a conversation with whose son was feeling a little bit under the weather
Okay.
on the trip, and come to find out they were fairly close to camp. They did not stay home. Um, and
No.
yeah, and and that, and it's nothing against them, right? I understand it. This is their oldest. They're having, you know, longest he's been away. Like I get all of the perspective. Um, that kind of started Shauna and I having a conversation about some of these things, and how is it that, like, when Pierce started doing this, he was like, "Hey, I kind of want this to be my thing." And we were like, "Go."
Okay.
And he went to
Yeah.
camp. He went on when he was in high school, he went on a mission trip up to Atlanta with City Takers. I don't know if you're
Yeah.
familiar with them. So
Yeah. I've heard of them.
they went up there, and that kind of stuff. And I'm just like, I missed them, but I never once worried. Like,
Right.
I just I just didn't. And
Mm.
I think it's uh I think it's kind of twofold. I think on one side it's parents that like do a lot of things for their kids, And so they probably have the thought that, well, if he's not with me, and I'm like somewhat literally, somewhat figuratively spoon feeding him or her, and but he's not with me, like, how's the kid gonna get by, right? Um,
I am the
and
oxygen he breathes.
yeah, um,
Oh my heavens.
and I I had an experience with one of the kids in my group where he kind of saw his parents kind of stepping over a boundary in terms of
Mm.
that, like, hey, just kind of let me go. And when he realized he was kind of being singled out because of the way his parents were treating him, I just really kind of saw him get kind of a half sad, half kind of FOMO kind of look on his face. And I just looked at him. I was like, hey, man, it's cool. Like, if you got to do this, you got to do it, be all right. Um, so anyway, so that and a couple of things happened. We got to talking and before we started recording, we were talking about this about how like this is pretty predominant in homeschool, right? For
Okay.
obvious reasons, right? So we got um kids are um kids are home more. They're under, the supervision and the eye of their parents more. And they have less opportunity to get away with stuff, right? And so we see that a lot. And I try to be pretty gracious about it and I'll like ask questions and stuff. And Shauna would just dig in, just like, hey, why are you doing that? He could do that or she could do that. Like,
I
you need to
expect nothing
stop,
less of Shauna.
right? I love her. She's great. And I'm like, what did they say? Well, she just kind of stared at me. She didn't say
We're not
anything.
friends anymore.
But you know what? The people that really love my wife, they know she's gonna do that.
Yeah.
And she
Oh
even has some
yeah.
friends that like, hey, this is kind of like her holding me accountable. I need this kind of thing. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Ooh,
so
there's a
yeah,
word we
so
don't use
there's
much. Sorry.
ooh, there's the A word.
There's a
Um,
yeah. He said it.
so, um, so yeah, so on one hand, I see myself kind of with my, college kid having to do some of this. Um, and it's difficult, right? So he's in school now. He's
Mm-hmm.
got a job. He's got his own car. He's, he's grown up. He's learning things about his schedule. He's like, well, they won't let me off. Well, I guess you're going to have to figure something out. You're going to have to, you calling in or you going to cancel your plans, right? What are you going
Yeah.
to do?
One or the other.
And so, and I try to tell him all the time, like, look, I'm not going to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make you do anything with this. I was like, here's something to think about, but it's your call. And that's hard. It's really hard. Um, and then, but on the other hand, I see people like taking it to the extreme with much younger kids. And I'm like, if you only knew the future trouble you were causing yourself right now.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know. I'm gonna stop monologuing and see what your thoughts are. Because you are, granted, I know you have a very young child who you're
Mm-hmm.
having to micromanage, but the majority of their life, right? I mean, it is what it is up to a
I'll
certain
probably
age.
give her more freedom than she deserves, but yeah.
But that's kind of the opposite end of this we can talk about, like you were mentioning. Um, but you're also in youth ministry, and
Yeah.
so you see you see probably some of that
Oh
too. So
man.
I'm curious what kind of thoughts you got.
Oh. Yeah, freedom is a or how much you give it to people, right? Um, I don't know, man. My brain went blank on thoughts. I've got a few illustrations where I feel like it's been. I've two thoughts, two stories rather that come to mind. Maybe it'll spark some conversation because hopefully we can give people some practical advice. Just complain about people's kids and how they're being treated or how they're treating others because of freedoms
I
they're
mean, but
allowed.
complaining is really fun.
I know, I know. There's a reason why. Who is it says don't let the grumbling be found upon you? Somewhere in scripture it says that. Probably all of them.
Oh, Oh,
Um,
why you gotta go back
I
to the
know.
A word
I think
there?
it was Paul. Oh, accountability. Yeah. Um, no, so it is funny being in student ministry. I have one of my key, like I count her as a key serve staff. Like she
Okay.
is one of my like she can't be a small group leader because of the way her Wednesday night schedule works. So basically she has one student who's in the seventh grade, no, eighth grade, and then one student who is I think she's in seventh. I need to go look at my rosters. But anyway, she's in seventh or eighth. And then she has another student who is like fourth. And so she drops her fourth grader off at another church who has kids programming on Wednesday nights. They start at 6. Then she comes over and hangs out with us from 6:30 to about 7:45. And then she leaves to go pick up her other kiddo because they get done at 8. And then she'll come back and help tear down while her daughter is in small group.
Okay.
Um, and but otherwise, like, so she's one of my like hospitality people. She's an auxiliary leader. I've passed off social media to her, so now if she's listening to this, she knows who she is if she didn't already. Yeah. um
Hmm.
but it's interesting. I'm one of those, like, I'm nervous to give parenting advice to parents who were like have kids way older than mine, and I don't feel qualified to give parenting advice anyway. um But there was I got a text from her one Wednesday night. She's like, "Hey, I may not make it because her younger kiddo was like something came up with the other church. And there was a tension there, and she was like, I mean, could I bring her? Could she sit somewhere?" And I was like, "Well, I don't really want that to become the norm." Like, because then word gets
Sure.
out that they got to go to youth group and they're way too young. And then I got other parents beating down. Well, why did her fourth grader get to be around, even if it's just adjacent, right? Like in their room with an iPad or whatever. And so I ended up calling her and was like, "Hey, I want you to hear my voice when I say some of what I'm about to say, or what I'm gonna like. I'm asking, if you will allow me to say, like, because text, like, man, you can misread tone through text." She's like, "Oh, okay, okay." And I think you need to send your kid to the other church, because the issue was that she had heard the way the kids pastor there talk to some. Now, what's funny is I used to work at that church and I know the kids pastor. And from my time on staff there, I loved
Mhm.
him. He was my cup of tea, man. He was kind of crazy. He was
Cool.
definitely counter structural in a sense. Like, this church is a little more like pragmatic, dogmatic, be the box. And he was like, no. And I was here for it because that's not me either. So, though it's funny, I like to know what the box is just so I can know what I can do around it and in it. I mean, I can play by the box, but anyway, that all that to say, I was like, "Hey, how about you invite her, like, tell her to ask for a conversation with him, and sit down with him and be like, 'Hey, I saw this. Here's how it made me feel.'" And work that out versus her just being like, "I don't want to go to church tonight." Like, I saw this thing. I'm like the church hurt thing. She's like, "Okay,
Mm.
okay." And I was just like, I said, "Listen, I love you." I said, "As a parent, you're the primary disciple maker in the home." And I said, "So if you allow your third, fourth grader to have this much freedom right now, how does that then translate when they're 15, 16, 17?" It's almost like if you give a mouse
For
a
sure.
cookie, they're going, it's that kind of deal, right? Or if you give an inch, they take a mile. So and then she was talking, she's like, "Yeah, my kids aren't excited to come to church right now, and it's all been the last year, and it's kind of weird." And so I also gave the advice of, like, maybe you need to have like a family powwow, and you sit down with them and you point out to them, like, "Hey, here's what I've noticed in you, and I want to talk through this." And I said that honestly, I think will build trust with your kids because they realize that you're seeing,
Good
like,
point.
they know you're not dumb, but then you calling it will be like, point out. So anyway, she ended up making that her kiddo go to church. Kid had a great time. I don't even know if they had reconciliation or what happened, but apparently had a great time, and it's been great ever since. So that's one of those examples where I'd actually say, hey, like, in the younger ages, you need to tighten up some of that freedom and really be like, I am the parent. Like, I'm making this decision. It is for your good. I need you to trust me in this. And yes, there are times where they're not going to like you for it, but you kind of have to set that ground rule, right? Um,
Yeah,
but then
can we just dig in on that really quick?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So don't lose your thought,
Oh,
but
I can't lose my other story. It's pretty funny.
the whole thing about like no, like and I want to make I hope I'm not misunderstanding you here, but like the whole concept of requiring them to do something, some commitment,
Hmm.
right? So whether it's like, you know, I don't feel like going to church. I don't feel like going to soccer practice.
Yeah.
You know how many times I tried to fake being sick or I had too much homework or whatever, and my parents were like, that ain't happening. You made
Yeah.
this commitment, you
Yeah.
go. And um we
I
kind of we kind of set that down with our kids pretty early. Um so it's got to be, like it's got to be something for them to skip. But I see a lot of kids from like, "Hey, I missed seeing you on Wednesday night," or "I missed you at such and such." I just didn't really feel like it.
Yeah.
Oh, so
There's a
uh
there's a culture right now of just, and we talked a little bit about before we started recording too. But yeah, it's the thank you. Sorry, viewers, listeners. It's being passed comments remote per his collar. So he behaves his nasty booty because he's a jerk. A lovable jerk, but a jerk. Yeah, there's a culture the joke we have around the office right now at our church is we live in a Burger King society, have it your way. And so if where you're
I've heard
going
that.
isn't the way you want it, you just dip. And I
Yeah.
think with students, especially, and this goes back to this conversation, right, of like the parent, like, man, if I could just have four families who value who I mean, not just value, but prioritize the value of an active ministry in their kids' lives, and that mom or dad and both hopefully put their foot down and said, listen, and I've got one or two that do this where they're like, if the doors are open, you're there. Like you schedule things around it. And I get it. That sounds to some people, that sounds so horrible. And that sounds so rude and so offensive. But I'm telling you, for a lot of students, that much structure of you just being the parent and saying, nope, this is what we do. This is when we do it. And I mean, they're not saying you have to be there and have a good time. You get to choose that part. Like, if there's students listening, you get to choose what kind of experience you have. You can enjoy it, you can hate it, but you're there. Just make the best of it. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, who knows what kind of good will come out of that, or even if it's a Boy Scouts obligation, or yes, doing your homework, being on a sports team. The amount of people that go through athletics and they hit adulthood, and they're like, I'm so grateful that I stuck it out because I learned discipline and I learned time management. I learned XYZ. And I think the same goes with like if we're talking specifically in the realm of faith. I know for us that's kind of a common ground at the moment, but it's that same idea, right? Like how your faith will benefit if you're there not once every 6 weeks, but if you're there 3 out of 4 for 6 years, you have no choice but to grow. Even if, yeah, you are a
Yeah.
sixth grader and you're like, I have no idea what's going on. That dude just said Satan from stage. What? What is Satan? Who dat? You know? But then you hit your 12th grade year and that kid might be playing on the band. He might be leading a middle school small group and he might have fallen in love with the word. Like you don't know what happened if you just kept them in it versus letting them come home halfway through the first year and be like, I don't know. There's only two other guys in my small group. One of them eats his boogers. I don't know.
Yeah, the
I,
this reminds me of the guy who is currently and is transitioning out of being the scoutmaster for the Boy
okay.
Scout troop, right? Um I became a fan of this guy after this, but several years back we were down um doing a camp out with the boys, this place called Rodman Dam.
Okay.
Um Down it's like Ocala-ish somewhere. For those not familiar with Florida, it is down south of Jacksonville, the middle of nowhere. Um,
Yep.
great, great place, great camp spot. Anyway, so we were taking the absolute longest path to get to the dam. We're gonna do some fishing there and just kind of check it out. And it's a whole thing. It's cool. You should check it out. Um, and so, and I'm like, Frank, we are. What in the world's happening? And he's like, well, Chad, he's like, so he took we kind of took this path along the kind of water's edge and made them climb over these rocks. And I'm like, we if we went that way along the road, we'd have been there 15 minutes ago. And he's like, you know what, Chad? Some of these boys do not have the opportunity to be put into a situation that they cannot get out of, that their
Mm,
parents, you know, aren't there, whatever.
yes.
And he's like, so, and we had, it wasn't that bad, but there were a couple kids like that were having some trouble balancing and had to have some of
Sure.
theirs help them kind of across some of the rocks and climbing up and down and, just whatever. And none of them got hurt, but it was kind of a challenge. And had to take it slow and I saw a couple of the kids that really, kinda had to huff it out and just, kinda grit their teeth and get through it, and I was like, man, after that, I was like, "Hey, I love what you're doing here. I really do," especially, being a dad of of 2 boys, and I think, there are times where we require them to do that, but, um, you know, but but just knowing I got somebody else who's kind of, he's very old school. I mean,
Hmm.
he's kinda older Gen X, if I had to put a guess to it, but
Okay.
he's very old school in the way that he, is parents, everything. He's just, tough dude and just, whatever. So, but I really like that. And ever since we had that conversation, I remember kind of thinking about that. It's like, um, them, putting your kids into a situation where they really have no choice but to just press forward. And that's not
Yeah.
everything, right? That's not the way every situation is supposed to be. But if the way I think about it, like if my kids never have that opportunity, they are absolutely missing out
Well, and
on just learning grit and everything else.
it also sets unhealthy expectations. So let's take the principle. All right. So other dads, parents that are listening out there, soon to be parents, whatever. If you set an expectation that you will handle everything for them when they graduate and hopefully leave your house someday, you have now set an expectation that every boss, manager, supervisor, professor, teacher, pastor, whatever,
Yes,
is going
sir.
to give them everything that they want, that they will provide, that those people will provide everything. And that's where I think we're seeing some of this unemployment spikes or the turnover because kids are getting into there and they're going, well, you're going to pay me 60 grand and I get to my butt, right? And I'm like, heck no, you're going to work, man. And that's kind of what happens when you begin to bubble wrap students and kids and teenagers. Like we're setting them up for some really bad expectations. And it's and I get it. Like I get the parents' heart, right? Like I get it. We don't want our kids to hurt. Um we don't want to see them struggle. We want to help them where we can. But I think learning that balance of also allowing them to learn to fend for themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, tonight, like before we got on, so the way Amelia goes to bed now is you sit her in her crib and then you sit in a chair. She asks us to sit and you just rock there and she usually just passes right out. And tonight she just wasn't. She was talking and she just kept saying she wanted to get up, which means she wants you to hold her. But I could tell it what she was doing was prolonging bedtime, and I was like, no, I mean, like you need to lay down, you need to go to sleep. Well, I can't find this thing, and I want to get up, and so I just said, all right, I'm gonna see you in the morning. I'm obviously becoming a distraction, and like I know there have been nights where when she starts crying, like I would have gone back in and been like, all right, I'm holding my girl, like that's my girl. But tonight was one of those where I had to come out of my big boy pants and be like, she'll be okay. She will go to sleep. She won't hate me for
Yeah.
it,
She's
you
not gonna
know.
cry for an hour and a half,
She's not gonna cry for an hour. And then she
nothing
didn't.
crazy.
Like I came immediately downstairs, turned on the monitor, and yeah, she's still sitting up in her crib, but she's just staring silently. I haven't heard her the rest of the night. So, and I get it. Some parents, there's this fear that the kid will hate them if they walk out of the room while they're screaming. I don't know. I don't. She's two. Some of these
Yeah.
memories are not core memories, to quote uh whatever that movie is, Inside Out. Um, but yeah, I think that's some of it is like so. Even there, I'm exercising a lesson for my daughter of you don't need me to go to sleep on your own. It's
Yeah.
nice. It's definitely nice, and I enjoy that quiet time, just getting to sit and listen to her fall asleep, and I catch up my Bible reading sometimes in there, and I pray over her, or sometimes I just sit and play video games on my phone. But like, she doesn't need me. She can do it. So but yeah,
And let me
that's
let me just say though to that, like, to the parent who's listening and it's like, I cannot allow my baby to be crying in their crib. I I get that. I so get that. Let me tell you something. When we had when we had Pierce and he would be fussing, nothing wrong with him,
Mm,
right? Clean diaper, full belly, everything's good, not sick, just not ready to go to sleep, not ready to
yeah.
take a nap, whatever it is. I'll come up, listen to the door, and I'm like, he's crying. She's like, and I'm like, we can't just leave him there. She's like, why not? You know,
Watch me.
I'm probably being much more harsh for her tone than
Yeah,
she
yeah,
really
yeah,
was,
no,
but I'm
yeah,
just like, isn't that wrong? Like, are
yeah.
we gonna get in trouble?
DFAC shows
You
up.
know, or like, is that bad for him? And she had to coach me. It's like, listen, she's like, and we had this book that kind of goes pregnancy all the way through like infancy and stuff. And she's like, you know, as long as they do, and I forget what the magical time was, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. I forget.
There is a
But
yeah,
yeah, there's a limit. But I was just like, I was a wreck like the first
yeah.
couple times we did
I
that.
remember. I remember
Like
those days. Yeah,
biting my nails and like listening at the door. And so let me just say, like, for the parent that's like, can't do it, like I've been there, but at the same time, I think that's a great that's a great opportunity to let go a little bit. And it's hard. And if your kid cries for 5 or 10 minutes in the crib, when you know when there's not actually something wrong, and they
yeah.
just don't want to be asleep, um, that is like that's some good like that's a good exercise. And
And I think it's good
I'm
for
not always going to
parents
be there.
too. Yeah, and
That's
I
what I'm
think it's
talking about.
also good for parents to like I struggle with Megan on this because she doesn't ever want to put, and I haven't done this yet, but that's because I'm also not working at home when I'm home with Amelia. I can give Amelia my undivided attention, but there
Yeah.
are times where I've told Megan like, put her in her room, put some toys in there, put the baby gate up, to monitor on, take that time for yourself. Because Amelia can play, she can. I get it. She wants someone to play with, and that enters into a whole different conversation. But there is part of it where, like, you as a parent also need your time. And yeah, if you're strapped all day with the kid at home, find ways to make that space. It may not be for long, but give yourself something.
Yeah.
So that comes like for me when it comes to bedtime and putting her in the crib, like, yeah, she can keep crying. There's a few instances where, yes, the way she'll cry, I'll be like, okay, I'm going in. Like, and you'll learn that too. But there are also times where it's like,
Yeah.
she's fine. It's
Yeah.
just,
All
it's
the
good
different
for me to
cries.
set that boundary. It's good for her, and set that expectation now, and they'll grow through it. But yeah, that was my thought a little bit on the freedom thing.
So you were also going to tell a funny story, but I
I
cut you
have
off.
Yeah, so I recently had two volunteers magically spring up. They are a set of grandparents,
Oh, awesome.
and oh yeah, they're great. They're well,
I love it.
they're coachable. Let's put it that way. So the first
Hey,
night
that's good.
they're here together. So their grandson is in the 6th grade, brand new. And the
Okay.
first night we hit the music piece of the night. I look over, and Grandpa standing next to grandson in large group. I was like, huh. That's weird because that's not where I told him to be. They're on my hospitality team. They're more of a safety and check-in and snack bar role. They're supposed to.
Sure.
They don't have to stay out in the lobby, but they are kind of the guardians, as it were, between
Yeah.
large group time and the lobby, and then anybody who might come in off the street, help get them checked in and where they're supposed to be. So I walk over to his wife and I'm like, hey, so we'll just call him Bob. So Bob is standing next to your guys' grandson. She goes, yeah, I was like, what's up with that? She's like, well, he hasn't made friends yet, and he was kind of lonely and felt kind of
Mm,
awkward. And I was like, okay. I said, so it might feel really awkward for other students here that his grandpa's standing next to him. I said, also, I really want your grandson to kind of be the truest version of himself while he's here and like get to be who he wants to be, like, express himself however. And he may not do that if grandpa's standing right there. I was like, could you help me and like maybe bring him back? And basically I was telling the staff the next day, I was like, I have never encountered helicopter grandparenting. Like we've heard of helicopter parenting, but I've never heard of helicopter grandparents. Like they hovered. And I should have known because the first night they served, he wasn't serving, their grandson wasn't there, and it was just her. But she was pointing out everything and everywhere her grandson would be or participating in. And that's been my first clue of like, oh, you're serving all right, but you're also here to keep tabs on your grandson. So
Oh yeah.
there you go. Grandpa in worship next to his grandson, middle school boys. Helicopter grandparenting. So
Oh
yeah,
man.
that was my story. One of my thoughts on, I don't know if it really ties into what freedoms you give or not give, but allow your sixth graders to be sixth graders, people. They'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. That's interesting. And it's like, in that the thing I love about that scenario is they mean like the absolute best for him. And it's just like it's kind of in this awkward place where he doesn't know anybody. And they're like, well, we want to help him out. And they think they're helping,
But they're
but they're
probably
really not.
hurting. Yeah, yeah. Like I
Yeah,
don't I don't
exactly.
know if
Yeah.
I would approach him if his grandpa's standing. And the other thing too is I don't know that's his grandpa, right? Like if I'm another sixth grade student or another middle school boy, like, and I don't know who your grandpa is, and I just see some old dude hanging out with you, I ain't going near you. Like you weren't introduced as a small group leader, so I don't know you as a small group leader. So here's this unknown adult in this space. Like it's definitely an awkward optic.
Yeah.
He's passed a background check, but um, so yeah. Anyway, that was what I had. So was there anything else you wanted to touch on? I mean, we were talking a lot
Well,
about
you
the
made you actually made a really good point when we started talking about like moving on from just complaining to kind of like trying to give like some pointers or some advice or
yeah.
like helpful things. And I thought that was actually great because we can kind of sit here and rant a little bit, but um I think I think it's really hard. It is really hard. And um I will be perfectly transparent here and say that for several years, the reason I was able to do this is because my wife said we need to do this, and I knew she was right. But I was like, oh man, that's hard. you know? Um, and I think one thing that we started doing, and I think I've been on both sides where I have probably given too much leeway, too
Hmm.
much freedom, and had to reel it back in, and also not enough, and realize, hey, I got to cut the cord a little bit here.
Yeah.
So, um,
I will
granted,
say, I
you
guess
know,
is yeah. I
and
think
I think it's not an exact science, and so I think we all probably do that where we're like, okay, if you're at the point where you kind of cut that cord, so to speak, and you never have to reel them back in. You never have to go back to that. I would I would argue that maybe you waited too long. Um, because I think it's good for your kids to, okay, they trust me and they may violate that trust a little bit. And then you got to bring them back in.
and I was gonna say I
And
think it's okay to tell parents you can reel them back in if your kid, like I remember that
yeah.
with my brother growing up. Like I forget what he did, something stupid always. And my mom instantly pulled privileges. I mean, and she looked at him square in the face and said, I trusted you. I gave you X amount of privilege. You
hmm
broke it by doing blank blank with so and so or however or whatever. And she said, until such time as I deem fit, you're not going. And then I could go and do the same thing he was asking to do. And he'd be like, oh, that's not fair. And she goes, he's not violating my trust. And so that's, I think I want to tell parents, and that was in high school. So I mean, like, parents, you're still parenting until honestly they leave the house. Now I will say the longer you take, if you're not constantly breaking up the cement by reining in and allowing out and reining in and allowing out, and that way your kids never get to a place where they go, well, status quo says that I always get to go to the mall whenever I, like, we use that example, right? Whenever I ask, I always get to go. And then all of a sudden, 17, you tell them, no, you can't go this week. I mean, now you're going to cause more jeopardy to your relationship. But if you stay on top of, like, and communicating with your kid, I guess the biggest thing is like, here's what I'm allowing you to do, here's why, and here's the parameters I'm setting. And then if you execute this well and I see consistency over the next couple of whatever, however you want to determine that, you know, we can talk about furthering that leash out. But then also, like, follow up on your word. I learned this as a teacher in the classroom. Like, if you say, hey, consequence for talking out is going to be a referral, you better freaking execute, because they'll eat you alive. So, like, for parents, I mean, I know it's tough. There are days you're like, I don't want to deal with them, put them on an iPad, send them their Xbox, whatever. But like, if you set, hey, talk back to your mom, consequences are this, follow through with it. There are times to teach grace. There are times, like, I remember my dad one time came in, he was supposed to spank me, and instead he sat and explained grace to me, and he was like, it's getting what you don't deserve. And he's like, and this week we're choosing to extend grace to you. We are not gonna deliver punishment in this way over this
Yeah,
thing. And I was like, okay. I mean, and granted, my dad currently is right, like, he's has another arraignment coming up for attempting to commit homicide. So not the greatest, like, not Father of the Year award by any means, but that was a memory that I have where I'm like, okay, I appreciate this. And so, like, I think just giving permission to parents, like, it's okay to cut the leash, it's okay to let the leash out. I think some of that just takes discernment on what is it they're asking for, and then also having the forethought, like with that one parent I was talking about, like, if you allow your third grader to make decisions about things that you value, right? Kind of going back to that, like, because her response, and she meant, and none of this was like a defensive. She was just explaining her reality, which was she didn't grow up in a church culture, and so church for her wasn't a big deal growing up. Um, but it has something that she values now as a parent, then that will translate to her students based on how she communicates that value to them, and she can break, if we want to call that a generational curse or whatever, and then create a generational blessing.
sure.
But I think it's generational patterning, at least, is like, okay, my parents didn't value church, but I've discovered there's a value in it. I want my kids to have this experience and this value. Then that means you lay down the hard nails and say, hey, no, until I reach a time where I decide, because, like, everybody's different, right? Whether it's till your student gets a car, or it's till your student hit 17, right? Like, we all set different rules for when we start allowing certain freedoms. But I think just having that discernment, having that forethought of, if I allow them freedom in this area now, like, if I were to allow Amelia to eat whatever she wanted now, well, by the time she's 6 and still eating whatever she wants, she's going to be like 600 pounds and dead. So we're not going to do that. It can't be
Yeah,
chocolate milk and mac and cheese every day.
unfortunately, and Amelia, I feel you, girl. I feel it.
I mean, I love that chocolate milk, and, well, Dada makes it good. I make good chocolate milk. I'm a
Yeah,
heavy
that makes it good.
I'm heavy on the poor, man. So that's
Oh
my thoughts.
yeah,
That's my advice. Like, and I think the parents out there, like, I don't, if you want to DM one of us and be like, hey, like, we'd love to hear that, and if you want us to share on the show, we would. Like, if you want to DM us and be like, hey, my kid right now is asking a lot about playing, I don't know, Call of Duty, and they're 12. Like, I think Chad and I'd be more than willing to sit down and be like, okay, here's our thoughts, our perspectives,
mm-hmm.
on a 12,
Yeah,
especially because we both work with middle schoolers, and it's like, here's what we see, and then here's what that freedom may end up translating. Because the other thing too is what you see as allowing a freedom. So if it's Call of Duty, you might see that as okay because it's, they take, there's a safety mode you can turn on, the cussing goes away, the blood goes away, and it's just a run and gun. But your student might translate that as, I'm allowed to play any rated M game and I'm only 12.
for sure.
Well, then they're
Yeah.
going to go find that game that's full of nudity. There's no safety mode. It's not just a run and gun, but it's got more in it. Like, and then all of a
Mm.
sudden you walk in on it and you're like, whoa, I never said you could play that. Well, mom, you let me play Call of Duty. And now you're stuck in that kind of, like, you have to backpedal until you remove that game. And it's not that it's going to cause a break in your relationship, because hopefully you have a healthy relationship. There's a video game, but there's probably going to be tension for a season. And so it's how do you navigate that rift and how do you think through some of these decisions? So I don't know, Chad, I'm going to throw you out there as a volunteer as like, yeah, I think we're open for whether bringing that on the show. I think that'd be kind of cool, to work through some of the parenting stuff y'all are working through and kind of being a
Yeah.
brain tank for you.
Yeah.
Um, that's not what that's called, but a think tank. That's what I
Think tank.
was
Yeah, I know what you
thinking.
meant. Brain tank. Yeah.
But
You know,
yeah,
one thing that changed a lot for me in this is I probably heard it on a podcast. That's where I get a lot of my great ideas. You know, great ideas.
yeah.
That was finger quotes for those of you listening and not watching. Um, and Shauna was, I don't know, this was a couple years ago. I don't even know where she was. Actually, this was probably like 3 or 4 years ago. And we're sitting around and I asked the boys as we're eating dinner, I'm like, hey, what is it that me, and your mom do that really show, by our actions that we love you? And they
Mm,
thought, and honestly, I should remember, I don't remember what Jude said because what Pierce said just so blew me away. He's like, hey, when like you tell me I can do something and then something happens. And like we all know now that thing is so much more difficult, right? So something comes up, something you didn't know about, whatever, but you let me do it anyway. That tells me that you love me and you trust me.
mm.
And I was like, not gonna cry, not gonna cry.
I'm a man.
But I really took that to heart. And so the next time, the next several times that happened, I'd be like, I would tell him, hey, I am having second thoughts about this, but I trust you.
Yeah.
So know that this is kind of a little uncomfortable for me, but I'm gonna let you do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And 99% of the time he's very honorable with that kind of stuff. And with Jude, I remember when we when this was really hard for me. And so one of the first freedoms we gave both of them when they were younger is when they learned how to ride a bike was um uh the point where we let them ride beyond our sight,
Yes.
right? So our street isn't that long, but down our street and around the corner, and now I can't see you.
Yep.
I remember specifically doing that with Jude, and we got to a point where he could kind of go to the next stop sign, the next street. But the rule was, hey, you going down, gotta come right back. And there was a kid he used to play with on that street. So then he'd go down to his house. I'm like, but if you're gonna stay, you gotta come back and let me know. And so he would, and then he didn't. And I didn't see
Mm.
him for 15, 20 minutes. And I'm kind of freaking out. But he finally comes back, and I'm like, I don't know, buddy. It's gonna be a while before I let you do that again. And he was super upset. And then, we slowly let him go further out and further out. And we had to reel it in a couple times. He got into a thing with a couple kids in the neighborhood that were saying something to one of his buddies. And, you
Mm.
know, we had to talk about that. And, so it was that kind of thing. But that was something that very concrete in my mind about how we, kind of slowly let him do just a little bit more than I was really comfortable with,
Yeah.
just because I had no control. It was beyond my sight. Couldn't really see where he was. Um, but man, it was his favorite thing in the world to do. Why? Because he could just ride his bike and be by himself and have some freedom. I mean,
Yeah.
it was great. And so, great for him, hard for me. But now
Parenting.
some of those things are easier. So anyway, so it's not easy, but it's something we got to do. So
You can do it.
you can do it, parent. You can do it.
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely. So
All right. I have no other nuggets of wisdom. I hope that was helpful to those of y'all listening out there. Feel free to DM us. We'd love to have that kind of stuff and material and however we can help. But yeah, I think that's going to conclude this episode
of the Dad Report. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. You can support us by sharing the show with your friends and family. Please subscribe, rate, and leave a review.
Want more of the Dad Report? Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and even join the community over on Discord. Don't forget to send us your dad jokes for a chance to be featured on the show.
Remember the words of Billy Graham about fatherhood. A good father is one of the most unsung, unpraised, unnoticed, and yet one of the most valuable assets in our society.
So if you are a dad, we're cheering you on. If you have a dad, be kind to him. And if you know a dad, tell him about our podcast.